Course 405, Cooperatives and Collective Action, Unit 1, Introduction to Cooperatives, Lesson 2, History. In the present lesson, we will discuss the origin, evolution, history and genesis of cooperatives in India. And the lesson is structured in the following manner. It is actually divided into two parts. So, first we will get an overview of cooperatives in India, and second we will delve on the history and emergence, which is divided into two parts. We look at the pre-independence era and the post-independence period. In India, the cooperative movement has played a key role at a grassroots level by involving citizens democratically. In fact, India has had one of the world's largest cooperative movements, and cooperatives play a very important role in the agricultural, banking and housing sectors particularly. There are many cooperatives with different sets of people as members. In fact, in almost every sphere and sector there are cooperatives. In India, we see that cooperatives arrange loans and provide funds for their members at a reasonable interest. We see cooperatives in the banking and finance sector spread across rural and urban areas. For example, there are primary agricultural credit societies, PACs, which are established by farmers' associations at village level, and these primary agricultural credit societies send credit requests to district central cooperative banks in advance. And then we also have the state cooperative banks, which are at the apex of the rural cooperative lending structure. The primary agricultural credit societies are a collective of farmers. Therefore, they have greater negotiating power than, say, one individual farmer going and presenting his case for credit to a commercial bank. In the farm sector, cooperatives are supporting post-harvest processing, storage, transportation, trade, input procurement and so on and so forth. Cooperatives sell agricultural products in mandis at reasonable prices and therefore avoid exploitation by middlemen. Cooperatives collect milk from villages and sell it in cities and provide members with the right price for the milk. Dairies, sugar mills, spinning mills, all of these are also there as cooperatives. In fact, cooperative sugar mills account for 35% of the sugar produced in the country. Then there are also cooperative marketing societies, and there are producers cooperative groups which provide access to raw materials, tools, machinery, etc., and they promote the interests of the small producers. There are also handloom societies like APCO, that's the AP Handloom Weaver Cooperative, or Boinika, which is the Odisha Handloom Cooperative, or Haryana Handloom, etc. And these are examples of producers' cooperative societies. Cooperative stores also save customers money by providing them with the right kind of goods at a reasonable price, and they curb the arbitrary price collection by traders. Customers' cooperative societies therefore safeguard the interests of all customers as they make the products and goods affordable. Examples are Kendriya Bhandar, Apna Bazaar, Sehkari Bhandar. The purpose is to deliver items at lower cost to the customers, and customers buy directly from the producers, thus removing middlemen. There are also cooperative housing society in urban areas, and they provide cheap housing to people. So, from providing credit to producing, procuring or marketing products, be it fertilizers, milk, sugar, fish, several others, there are cooperatives. For example, the Indian Farmers Fertilizers Cooperative is there, IFCO. There is also Amul, which is Gujarat's highly profitable dairy cooperative. In fact, both these are examples that we may have heard of. Amul is in fact one of the most well-known cooperative brands in India, which was born out of the need and coming together of lakhs of milk producers in the state of Gujarat. So, in India, in almost every sphere of national and local economic activity, we see the presence of cooperative societies. Among cooperatives, there are also multi-state cooperatives, that is, those which have operations in more than one state. So, for instance, a producer organization can procure grains from farmers from different states. And in India, there are several thousand multi-state cooperatives that have been registered. Let's have a look at some statistics and data to know the scale and extent of cooperatives in India. According to the Ministry of Cooperation, there are around 8.5 lakh cooperatives in the country with a total membership of 290 million persons. 98% of rural networks are covered by cooperatives. As per a study which was done in 2018, the percentage of cooperative members in the total population has increased. It has increased from 3.8% in 1950-51 to 22.2% in 2016-17, so which means there has been a significant increase. As per data from the National Dairy Development Board in 2019-20, dairy cooperatives procured 4.80 crore litres of milk from 1.7 crore members and sold 3.7 crores of liquid milk per day. So, such is the scale and extent to which cooperatives are present in India, and they have marked a significant presence. In most countries of the Asia Pacific region, cooperatives were established during the colonial rule. Likewise for India. India's cooperative movement actually originated in the agriculture and related sectors as a way for farmers to pool their resources and prevent themselves from being exploited by moneylenders. In 1904, the British government in India put into force the Cooperative Credit Societies Act. This act dealt solely with the extension or giving of credit, but the sector of cooperatives was later opened up to other activities in 1912. Further, in 1919, administrative reforms were introduced and cooperatives were transferred to provincial control. After independence, the cooperative movement got further impetus and further momentum. The government realized that the cooperative sector plays a significant role in the rural economy. The constitution placed cooperatives in the state list. Through the directive principles of state policy, the constitution placed responsibility upon the states to advance cottage industries on a cooperative basis, particularly in rural areas. And cooperatives therefore came to be considered instruments of socio-economic development. Later, Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru integrated cooperatives into the 5-year plans, and cooperative societies in India expanded and grew. Every village was encouraged to have at least one cooperative society. States made their own laws to regulate cooperatives, but in 1984, the Multi-State Cooperatives Societies Act, which is later amended in 2002, it was enacted by the Parliament. Today, cooperative enterprises continue to be driven by a social mission, yet they ensure that they contribute to national development and to economic growth. Some countries have also recognized cooperatives as a third pillar in the national development policies, which means along with the public and private sectors. Some countries have also enshrined the importance of cooperatives in the national constitution. So, this was a brief and a broad overview of how cooperatives came to existence in India. In the following section now, we will discuss this in greater detail. Let me begin with the cause or what led to the cooperative movement in the first place. The cooperative movement in India was born out of the distress and turmoil that was there in the last part of the 19th century, that is late 1800s. The Industrial Revolution had negatively impacted village industries and driven people to agriculture, which was the only avenue of livelihood and employment. But even here, the fragmentation of land holdings made agriculture uneconomic and not very remunerative or beneficial. This, combined with other factors like rigidity of land revenue collection, there was uncertainty of rainfall, there was a lesser crop production, all these factors actually led farmers to approach money lenders. And money lenders gave money either by purchasing the crop that they would purchase at a throwaway price, or they would charge very high rates of interest. All of this put together pushed the need for farmers to have cheap credit through another way or through another means, alternative to money lenders. So this is the backdrop in which the cooperative movement originated in India. When we look at the history, evolution and genesis of cooperatives in India, we can divide it into two phases, the pre-independence and the post-independence period. In the pre-independence period, we see the evolution again across different stages, marked across different decades. So we have the initial stage in the period 1904 to 1911. We have the modification stage from 1912 to 1918. We have then the expansion stage 1919 to 1929, and the restructuring stage from 1930 to 1946. So almost every decade was marked with development and evolution. And then of course we have the post-independence period. Let us first look at the pre-independence period. The first in this, the initial stage from 1904 to 1911, when the first Cooperative Act in India came into existence. In 1901, the Indian Famine Commission proposed to the government to set up a committee, and the committee's task was to report on the introduction of cooperative societies in India, and this was headed by a British officer. The committee reported in 1903 and in favor of having cooperatives, and it was after this subsequently and as a result of this report that the first Cooperative Credit Societies Act was passed in 1904 by the then British government. What were the salient features of the Act? What did the Act contain? It said that any 10 persons living in the same village or town or belonging to the same class or tribe could form a cooperative credit society. Cooperative societies could be classified as rural or urban depending on majority of the total membership. So whether it was agricultural or non-agricultural. So if it was 80% agricultural, it would be rural. And rural societies, rural cooperative societies were not permitted to distribute profits. But in the case of urban cooperative societies, profits could be distributed after carrying 25% of the net profits to the reserve fund. Now, this act had its drawbacks. It didn't provide for legal protection to non-credit societies. It was focused on credit societies. And it was also found that the classification of societies into rural or urban was rather arbitrary and inconvenient. Now, learning from the drawbacks of this act, we see that certain steps came up in the second stage, which is the modification stage, 1912 to 1918. It was in this period that the Cooperative Societies Act of 1912 was enacted, and the drawbacks of the 1904 Act were remedied with this Act. What did this Act contain? What were its key features? It said that any society, credit or otherwise, which means including non-credit, could be registered. Then it also said that a society needed to have its objective as the promotion of the economic interests of its members. So that should be the objective of a cooperative society. Further, that no member could have more than 1/5 of the total share of the capital or hold share exceeding 1000 rupees in such a society. And societies were granted exemption from payment of income and income tax and stamp duties, and there were advantages that were noted for a cooperative society. A few years later, in 1915, a committee was formed, which was headed by Sir Edward McLagan, who was appointed, and the committee was appointed to study and report whether the cooperative movement in India was proceeding on economically and financially sound lines. The committee observed some of the drawbacks of the cooperative movement at that point in time. It noted that factors like illiteracy, there was misappropriation of funds, there was delay in granting loans, and there was also a viewing of the cooperative movement as a government movement. So these different aspects and factors actually formed like the drawbacks of the cooperative movement, and this is what was noted by the committee. And the committee therefore made some suggestions. It said that all members should be made aware of the cooperative principles. It said that honesty should be the main criterion for taking a loan. It said that dealing should be strictly confined to members only. It said that applications should be carefully scrutinized before giving loans, and there should also be careful follow-up for effective utilization of the loan, and that one member, one vote should be strictly followed. But these recommendations could not be put into practice because of the First World War, which coincided with this time period. In the next phase, which is the expansion stage from 1919 to 1929, we see a growth and expansion of cooperatives in India. The Montague-Chelmsford reforms were introduced in 1919 in India by the British government, and there were several reforms that were taken up in the country. As far as cooperatives are concerned, cooperatives became a provincial subject. So this gave further impetus to the movement, and various states passed their own acts for cooperatives. As a result, the membership of cooperative societies increased considerably during this period. During this phase of 1919 to 1929, in 1929, the Great Economic Depression was witnessed by the whole world, and in India, the effects were felt very evidently. Prices of agricultural commodities fell down, unemployment and other economic crises grew. Agriculturalist farmers could not pay back the loans of these societies, and overdues increased, and the cooperative societies suffered greatly. So what followed then was a stage of restructuring of the cooperatives. So the restructuring stage was in the time period of 1930 to 1946. Various committees were appointed in Madras, in Bombay, in Travancore, Mysore, Gwalior, Punjab, and the purpose of these committees was to examine the possibilities of restructuring cooperative societies. So this phase was marked with a revival of interest in organizing the cooperative movement. And the Second World War broke out, and the Second World War created certain abnormal conditions, which also led to developments in the cooperative movement in India. As prices of agricultural commodities began to rise, rural farmers got extra economic gains, and non-credit societies like marketing, production or consumer societies, they increased rapidly. The All India Cooperative Planning Committee in 1945 pushed for the growth of cooperatives. So pre-independence, we see that the initial stage is marked by the enforcement of acts for cooperatives in India, followed by the modification stage, which acknowledged the drawbacks of the early acts that had been put into force, followed by an expansion stage, which was marked by, again, looking at the drawbacks of the acts and the steps taken in the previous stage. And later what happened was, because of developments, external developments, when societies, cooperative societies had been affected, there was a need to relook and revive the movement, which is what was marked in the restructuring stage. So these are the 4 stages of the pre-independence period. Now coming to post-independence. After independence, India's approach for economic development was to have a mixed economy consisting of 3 sectors, namely public, private and cooperative sectors. Cooperatives were visualized to play the role of a balancing factor between public and private sectors. After independence, cooperatives became an integral part of the 5-year plans. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru considered cooperatives one of the important pillars of democracy. In 1958, the National Development Council recommended a national policy on cooperatives and also for training of personnel and setting up of cooperative marketing societies. And in 2002, Government of India announced a national policy on cooperatives. In 1958, the National Development Council recommended a national policy on cooperatives, and it also recommended for training of personnel and setting up of cooperative marketing societies. The National Cooperative Development Corporation, that is NCDC, was set up under the NCDC Act of 1962. There were also different committees that had been set up for cooperatives. There was a Rural Credit Survey Committee which was set up in 1954, and it recommended state participation in cooperatives at all levels. There was the S.T. Raja Committee, which was appointed by the Government of India to suggest amendments to the cooperative law. There was also a committee which prepared a model act to enable state participation and appointment of government nominees on the management of some cooperative societies. In 1984, the Multi-State Cooperative Societies Act was enacted by the Parliament. This was later amended in 2002. So this was the trajectory of the evolution of cooperative societies in India. Before I conclude the lesson, I will touch upon Mahatma Gandhi's socialist philosophy on cooperatives. According to Mahatma Gandhi, cooperation was necessary for the creation of a socialistic society and for complete decentralization of power. He said that cooperation is an important means to empower people. He said that cooperation among farmers is an absolute necessity. He said that industry based on agricultural produce, be it cotton, sugar, oilseed, wheat, etc., should be on a cooperative basis, so that producers could secure the best value for their produce. So cooperative societies in India were started, they expanded, they grew, and they continue to grow and contribute to the development of rural economy and to the growth of India. With this, I conclude the lesson. Thank you.